Our scripture reading, this second scripture reading is Mark 4:35-41. That evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the east side." So they left the crowd, and his disciples started across the lake with him in the boat. Some other boats followed along. Suddenly, a windstorm struck the lake. Waves started splashing into the boat, and it was about to sink. Jesus was in the back of the boat with his head on a pillow, and he was asleep. His disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to drown?" Jesus got up and ordered the wind and the waves to be quiet. The wind stopped, and everything was calm. Jesus asked his disciples, "Why were you afraid? Don't you have any faith?" Now they were more afraid than ever and said to each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Amen. Okay, this morning our message is going to be coming from Creed's house. You're from Millville, right?
I go to West Side in Millville. I live in Estelle Manor like Pastor Tom does. So at annual conference, sometimes Larry Goss and Pastor Tom and I get together. We call ourselves the Estelle Manor Caucus. I'm the district director for Delaware Bay for lay servant speaking. So Janice Betts said, "Pastor Tom's going to be away. Can you help out?" And I said, "Sure, Janice, no problem. We'll take care of it." So it's a pleasure to be here. It's not always the things where I compliment, make a point of complimenting everything, but I do want to say that I think you are probably, how to phrase this the right way, the smallest church that I've been in with a full tech. So I'm impressed with that. Really, I'm impressed with that. I'm impressed with that. And of course, that we have balcony seating. So therefore, hello, everybody up there. Don't throw tomatoes or anything, depending on how it goes, but we'll work it out. So we do have a YouTube video that I found. So let's give that a try first, and then we'll have some art to show you.
The end of a long day by the lake. Jesus said to the disciples, "Let's go across to the other side." So, without any preparation, just like that, they took him away in their boat. But other boats came along too. A great storm blew up. But Jesus wasn't bothered. Head on a pillow, he just slept. They cried out, "We're going to die. Jesus, don't you care?" But in the end, Jesus got fed up. "That's enough. Quiet. Wind, hush. Waves, hush. Shush!" And as for the rest of you, what did you have to worry about? but they were more afraid of the calm than the storm. And of Jesus, who spoke to the storm, then spoke to them.
And then put up the painting. Fine art. This is actually Rembrandt. Showing the tiny boat being tossed. One of those things of interest when you look back in history is how much of what we consider to be the great artists wound up doing quite a bit with Christian themes. And so it turns out this was one of Rembrandt's most prominent paintings. I have to say, I've heard the story. I imagine we all have many, many times. And often it's, well, here's Jesus. He's really calm. And here's the disciples going bonkers. And that's the lesson we get from it. The disciples are always going bonkers because, after all, I'm amazed that Peter didn't have a speaking role in this one. He often seems to have kind of leading more with the mouth or the hands than necessarily with the brain. But then if Peter wasn't there, we'd have to come up with someone else to do that. And Peter seems to have the broad shoulders to fill that role very well. So in the first time I've done a message on this one. So if you like it, that's wonderful. And if you don't, I apologize. And we'll go from there. But I wanted to try to get an understanding of the setting for the story. Because the Sea of Galilee, and I was like, it's not that big, is it? And so I'm looking it up, and it's about 65 square miles, which is about 2/3 the size of Morris River Township. So it's not that big, which is why it's actually technically a lake, as it turns out. It is the lowest freshwater lake on the planet. The only lake that's smaller than that's the Dead Sea, but the Dead Sea is all salt, so it's not a freshwater lake. So a relatively small body of water. And from that, then I was thinking, well, should I have gotten from this that the storm, in essence, was a demonic thing that Jesus was dealing with? Come to find out, again, because the Sea of Galilee is so low and the hills are so high that then, warm air rises, cold air falls. Well, the cold air comes down, that hits the warm air, and sometimes you can get some pretty big storms. Because what I was thinking about was I had a old friend of mine. He actually grew up, spent a chunk of his time growing up near Lake Superior. And if you've heard of the Battle of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and you know that the storms on Lake Superior can be very traumatic, very severe. But that's 31,000 square miles, about 5 times the size of the state of New Jersey. So you could think of, hey, it's got its own weather going on and all that. How is it with the little lake? Then finding out about the hills and all the rest, and realizing in that too that certainly they don't have NBC 10 weather, right? So it isn't as though, oh, hey, we're just going to go out in the storm anyway. Jesus is with us. It'll be okay. We're going off to the other side. And for that area, that was by boat was how you went from place to place a lot of the time, was being out on the lake. And so sometimes out in the lake, you wound up with some major storms. So you're just thinking about how all that uh, part of it is our setting. And here was Jesus who had spoken, like, surprise, surprise, to multitudes. And it was so large, he had to get on the boat to be able to speak. Um, I'm going to tell you a little secret of folks from the pulpit. Oftentimes, after we've been up here for a little while, you want to take a nap. And I've got to do two today, so I know I'm going to feel like taking a nap later. But the big part of it is that sometimes we forget Jesus was the Son of God in the body of a human. Therefore, he gets tired, he gets hungry, etc. Therefore, he's told parables, told stories, interacted with a large crowd, and is tired and says, let's go to the other side. And so he lays down. We're not 100% sure whether the disciples actually carried him on. We think that, perhaps it's possible that Jesus was actually carried onto the boat already having started his nap, and they got him set up on there. Um, but so he lays down. Um, and one of the other interesting things from this story is that uh, some things you only see in one gospel, or you may see in two. There's a few things I think there's 8 parables. This isn't a parable, but there's 8 parables you see in all 4. But this is one that actually appears in 3 of the gospels, because it's also in the 8th chapter of Matthew, and it's also in what happens to be the 8th chapter of Luke. A little bit shorter, so you don't get the details of, well, there were other boats that went along, for instance. And with that is, so can't call it a flotilla just because we don't know how many boats there were. Let's say there were 2 or 3. And then the storm comes. A blog that I saw on this, a man named G. William Davis was saying, preferably don't be someone who's, we're on a nice calm day. It is rather hot outside, so I'm in shorts. I apologize. But a nice calm day, and we're again contrasting ourselves with how the disciples just simply lost all reason, or very afraid, and all the rest. Instead, think of it if we were on an airplane that lost its engines. How we would be responding. And to make it a little more fun, let's say Jesus was in the flight engineer's seat in the cockpit, so he was taking a nap. You're not allowed to take a nap as a pilot, but the flight engineer, he can do that, the third guy. And so plane's lost its engines, hasn't started to, descend or anything, but you've got trouble if the plane doesn't have engines. So one of the things that we see here is that the boat is taking on water. Anyone who's been on any type of cruiser, if you do a lot of nautical activities, know that the water is not supposed to be inside the boat. That's a sign that you have real trouble. And that's the point at which the disciples are really starting to panic and then are trying to wake Jesus up. And we're not really sure, as I realized as I was going through this, that um, this isn't something that that story I've really looked at that deeply before um, doing this for everybody today. So you're not sure, is it that were the disciples just looking for another pair of hands to help bail out the boat in that situation? Because we needed everybody we can get because the water's coming in, which obviously means it's faster than everyone else is bailing it out. We need another pair of hands to help bail out the boat. Or were they looking for some other more miraculous action? And also, you kind of have to marvel. I know some people are able to sleep through anything, but you're thinking about this. Okay, here's this major storm. Water is gushing into the boat. Jesus is in the back of the boat. Um, the other thing the blog writer Davis was talking about was seeing if you can include the words poop deck uh, in a message. The poop deck on a boat is actually the roof of a cabin that's in the back of the boat. Um, I don't think this boat was anywhere big enough to have a cabin. So he was just kind of laying in the back. But again, the water is not discriminating against, oh, I'm only going to be in the front. It was coming in everywhere. But he was staying asleep through all that until they finally were able to wake him up. And so again, we're in the part of, okay, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Again, a familiar theme of the disciples with Jesus. Now, here were the people who were with him in person for 3 years, saw all of the miracles from turning the water into wine at Cana at the wedding, all the way through. And yet, every single time something comes up, they are doubting, they are afraid. And his message consistently to us is don't be afraid. That isn't to say that the stuff isn't serious, that it's not a big deal, but we do need to make sure that Jesus is our first resort, not our last. That we are turning to him at the beginning, not I have tried everything else and nothing else works, and okay, I will get on my knees now and pray. You don't have to raise your hand if you fall prey to that. I know I have many times. But it's what we need to be looking out for. We need to be going to him at the beginning, not at the end. Because we may find that we actually didn't have to go through quite all the trials and tribulations and turmoil. It's kind of like the part about, well, if I have the faith of the mustard seed, what can I do? So you have the storm and you have the water coming in. And so there's legitimate fear at this point and we have no idea how the other boats are. Let's assume they were simply in the same situation. None of them had gotten swamped or overturned, but they were all in a bad way. And so you have, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Now, at that point, if Jesus wanted to, let's face it, he could have just floated in the air to the shore and said, hey, Not my problem. You take care of yourself, which is one of the major differences between Christianity and many other world religions. You know, when you're praying to a God for the rain or the crops or prosperity or fertility or health, um, you know, did you sacrifice enough to that particular deity? Well, you must have done something wrong. They will respond when they feel like it. End of story. Instead, here's Jesus. And Jesus can be grouchy. I think we can agree with that. I mean, after all, when he took the long way around before getting to Lazarus, yes, he wept when he was told Lazarus had died, but he wasn't necessarily all that happy that he was constantly being pestered. Well, how soon are we going to get there? Oh my goodness, it's bad. And then here's Martha. You know, if you had gotten here sooner, he'd still be alive. Jesus already had it under control. What are we doing? How do we handle it? And that's an important part of it too, because all of that goes into we may be the only Christians that someone sees today. And so if in difficult times we're losing our heads like everyone else is, what witness are we giving to the world? Because remember, the other boats, they were followers, but they weren't the disciples. Jesus was not on any of those other boats. So if they're going bonkers, they're losing their minds, they're losing control. Be expected. Here's the boat with Jesus on it, and they're still having trouble. Um, one of the Greek translations that I saw, instead of it being peace, be still, supposedly was avast, be muzzled, which I was like, oh, it sounds like a pirate. What's going on here? Avast simply meaning stop, be muzzled, be quiet. And so the wind immediately ceased. And again, whether that was quote unquote a regular storm or it was demons who were trying to create the things that Satan loves, fear and dissension and hate and doubt. We're not clear from that. And you can take that part however you want. I think this is really one of those stories that it isn't, oh, okay, well, here's the one clear message from it. Because sometimes we see in the Gospels there are things that um, it varies depending on where exactly we are and what challenges we think we're facing. And this, I think, is one of those to where hopefully we would all react in a crisis better than the disciples do. And we would all be going to Jesus first. But if we forget that and we lost it for a little bit, hopefully it doesn't take us as long as they do. Um, I thought about when I, again, going through the, well, peace be still. Um, there was a king named Canute. I think he was in Denmark. And the people in the court were just praising him, how wonderful he was and how powerful he was. And he decided, well, follow me. And so he walked out to the shore. I'm not going to walk around. I'll be good. Walks out to the shore and is right at the waves coming in from the ocean and says, I am the king. I command you to stop. Waves kept coming. He walked out a little further, says it again, and the waves kept coming. He was all wet. Walks back and is, what did you take from that? And of course, they're all silent because they don't know what to say at that point. And Canute winds up saying, I am the king, but I am nothing compared to God. God is the one who's all powerful, not I as an earthly king. And so understanding all of that is important. But we get the, don't you care? And of course, I imagine that from time to time, whether it's our friends, perhaps kids have said it, parents, relatives, they're telling you something going on. And of course, somewhere in there is going to be, don't you care? Aren't you concerned about me? Which I don't know about you, but unfortunately, I have found that usually doesn't work. When I get on my brother's case about, hey, this thing's got to get taken care of. Don't you care about it? And he looks at me like, well, I don't know if I do right at the moment or not as much as you do or whatever. And so it's one of those things of being kind of careful with um, what is it we're trying to achieve? And again, when we act out of fear and we waited till the last minute, um, our pleadings to God may not be quite the most humble and properly put together. And then, of course, we may get then annoyed that the response isn't quite what we hoped for either. So, um, after all, even the prodigal son, got down on his knees and said, "Look, just put me to work feeding the animals. I'll just give me some food." Um, and this is after he took half of his father's money, spent it all. No offense on wine, women, and song, basically. And then is coming back saying, I don't have any more money. And the father got him in with open arms. So we also have to think about, are we humbly beseeching the Lord, or are we saying, look, I come to church every week, you owe me? Let's be careful on how we handle those things. So, of course, then Jesus rebukes them. Why are you afraid? Have you no faith? Because Jesus wasn't going to let them get flooded over. And if you thought, if you're there as a disciple and you're thinking that's what's going to happen, no offense, but maybe you're in the wrong boat. Because something's not connecting here. But as is sometimes the case when we are confronted with or encounter people who are more powerful than we are, or figured out something that we didn't, or just wound up helping us out. See, my version here has, and they were filled with great awe. And sometimes a lot of translations, I think, have it as great fear. And said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? So I was happy I was saved. On the other hand, I'm a little afraid of who was able to do that. Uh, some parts, sometimes we hear, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Um, that's one I've always figured is more respect for the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Um, because here they were more afraid. Now it's kind of like, well, you wanted to be part of the group. When Jesus asked you to follow me, become fishers of men, you signed up for the ride. Granted, there was always some sort of back and forth going on. He had just had a time of preaching to a large group of people. Surprise, surprise, he was tired. He says, let's go to the other side. Lays down, and then you're going. The storm comes. Whether it was demons or natural or what, in this part of it, I don't know that it matters as much. The disciples are completely afraid. Wake him up. And again, most of us, when we're immediately woken up, I don't know that we're necessarily the happiest of people. And then, particularly if you're looking at this, this is almost like Gilligan's Island. The mighty ship was tossed. This is what yes, I've just dated myself. But, so a whole lot going on there. So he just gets woken up and it's peace, be still, or avast, be muzzled, whichever what translation you want to use there. And then he's rebuking them. And it isn't, we should have had a little more faith. Maybe we should have seen what else we could do with our faith. Maybe we more gently try to wake them up when the storm starts rather than waiting until we're really taking on a lot of water and potentially about to sink. And so then we end it with, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Well, who did you think you were aligning yourselves with at that point? If you truly believed, he didn't want you saying it, but if you truly believe this is the Son of God, this is the Messiah, this is our path to freedom, this is where you are happy that he's able to do these things. And at the price of doing those things is to rebuke you for not having had enough faith, where perhaps we need to work on that. And so that, again, that part of how we handle the rough situations, not letting Jesus be our last resort. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to make sure I do a little bit of caution on this part. That does not mean that you should turn around and do your own version of Jesus at the top of the temple after the 40 days. When Satan is there saying, well, you could just fling yourself off the temple and the angels will make sure that you don't stub your toe. What is Jesus' response? Do not put the Lord your God to the test. So therefore, do not go out on the ocean when there's a storm warning. That's not the idea. I will prove how much faith I have. Or the poor guy who, there's the flood warning. He's like, well, Jesus will save me. Flood comes up, the first floor of the house. He gets up on the roof. Here's the boat. Get in the boat. We'll take you to safety. Jesus will take care of me. I'm a good Christian. I go to church every week. I'm fine. Well, now the water is up to the roof. Helicopter comes by. They drop down the rope ladder saying, get on the rope ladder. We'll get you away. I'm a good Christian. I go to church every week. God will take care of me. He drowned. He's angry. Goes to St. Peter and says, I want to talk to God. I should not be here. And so he goes to God and he says, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a good Christian. I go to church every week. You let me drown. And God says, who do you think provided you with the warning, the boat, and the helicopter? What are you doing here? How do we respond to him? Not everything is a loud. Unfortunately, we are not likely until the end of days to have Jesus being right here saying, I'm here, follow me, I'll make it clear. We got to figure it out a little harder way. I am kind of glad that they had the troubles as disciples they had when they were right there with them. So I feel a little bit better about the times where I get it messed up. But let's do what we can to be those good disciples, to be those faithful witnesses, to be the hands and feet, and most importantly, to not panic in times of crisis, but instead give it to God to start with. And I thank you.